The swarm referred to in the tablets was no myth. Humanity had fought them a century ago during the Blood Rift campaign. The swarm were biomechanical apex predators, devouring fleets, consuming entire planetary biospheres. It had taken everything the Allied Human Defense Pact had to stop them. Humanity had won. Barely. But they hadn't realized what their victory looked like to the rest of the galaxy. To weaker civilizations. To the silent watchers. To those who had prayed for deliverance as their own suns dimmed. They hadn't seen strategy or survival. They had seen gods. What if this isn't the only sight? Quan asked days later. It wasn't. Over the following months, humanity uncovered dozens, no hundreds, of such shrines. Across dead moons, drifting asteroids, carved into the sides of comets. Some crude, made by stone and hand. Others etched with lasers and plasma tools far beyond what primitive society should have had access to. They had one thing in common. Human imagery. Even stranger, many of them had preserved data. Codices, tablets, hymns, ceremonial video logs. And some had encoded simulations. Primitive recreations of battles. Moments in human history. Augmented dramas that presented real events through the lens of divine legend. The Battle of Arcadia? Depicted with humans glowing, walking through vacuum without suits, casually punching through dreadnoughts. The Siege of Phobos? Rendered as an ascension of flame, with one human dragging a black hole behind him like a chained beast. It was laughable, if it hadn't been so disturbingly serious. They weren't mocking us. They were teaching us. Teaching others about us. With reverence. It was Commander Laras of the Svalin outpost who made the breakthrough. We're not just a religion, she said flatly. We're multiple. She spread a display of recovered data across the table. 10 different systems. 10 different sects. One worshipped humans as the bringers of final war. Another saw us as the starborn shepherds who will return at the end of time. Yet another believed we were already among them, hidden in flesh, waiting to awaken. They don't know we're just people, Laras whispered. No, said Hales. They've seen only what we did to survive. To them, survival looked like divinity. The galaxy is vast. But fast. Rumors spread through freighter convoys, rogue traders, black market data networks. Some religious data leaked. Then the pilgrims started showing up. First a few ships. Old, half-functioning vessels bearing symbols that loosely resembled human faces carved into metal. They didn't attack. They didn't communicate. They prayed. From orbit. They burned fuel in circular orbits, carved plasma rings in vacuum, offered relics, bones, wires, crystals, jettisoned an offering toward Earth's outer defenses. One even tried to sacrifice itself into Jupiter's upper atmosphere. Earth's government panicked. What if this was a cover? A trap? A prelude to invasion? But the visitors weren't threatening. They refused translation. Refused diplomacy. Only repeated one name in broken phonemes. Hummin. Like a mantra. An invocation. Meanwhile, human colonies began reporting strange behavior from native populations. On the Rost 3, a native cephalopod species began constructing shrines in the shape of Terran skyscrapers. On Lyri, a tribal race started branding their children with the Sol system's orbital pattern. On Hallex V, their primitive AI gods began updating scripture, listing human quantum computing principles as sacred text. We had become the backbone of myth, the bloodline of future legends. And the scariest part? They were starting to act in our image. The council convened on Luna. 1,000 questions. How do we respond? Do we correct the record? Reveal we're not gods, just survivors? Or do we use it? Because something had shifted in the power balance. Nations and species who once ignored Earth now approached with offerings. Treaties began referencing the favor of the final ones. Whole planets changed their banners to incorporate human iconography. Galactic economics pivoted. Weapon exports surged. Human-made relics now sold for fortunes, not for their function but for their aura. You didn't just buy a pulse rifle. You bought the wrath of Terra. It couldn't last. The problem with being a god is that someone will always come along to test you. And so they did. A theocratic empire known as the Aurelian Concord, who worshipped order and detested false idols, declared holy war. Not against Earth, but against the believers. They began burning temples, bombarding shrines, executing converts. They didn't care about us. They cared that others worshipped us. They wanted to prove humans were mortal. Their first target was the Kurol system, a minor species that had built a monument the size of a city shaped like a human outstretched hand. By the time Earth responded, Kurol was ash. Earth had two choices. Withdraw. Deny involvement. Let the religion die. Or respond. They chose a third. They sent one ship. A single dreadnought. The UHS Vindicator. No comms. No speech. No warning. It arrived in Aurelian space and hovered above their outer fortress world for exactly 66 minutes. Then it opened fire. The strike lasted 4 seconds. The fortress, once thought impenetrable, vanished beneath kinetic rods accelerated to relativistic speeds. No energy weapons. No nukes. Just raw Newtonian terror. Then the ship left. And the message was received. Not by the Aurelians. By everyone else. It became known as the Wrath of the Silent Flame. The faithful rejoiced. New sects were born. The Aurelian War ended not with a treaty, but with their quiet, fearful retreat. And with that, Earth's place as a deity was sealed. We had tried to be civilized, diplomatic. But all it took was one act of violence, and the galaxy returned to its faith. And back on Earth, people stared up at the night sky with something between awe and dread. Because it wasn't a question of if we were gods. It was a question of what kind of gods we were becoming. They stared at the night sky not with wonder but with worry. Because every flicker of light might be another prayer. Another shrine. Another war waiting to happen. Godhood had never been on Earth's to-do list. But now it was our identity, carved into the hearts of 1,000 alien cultures. And the galaxy, desperate, fractured, and drowning in fear, kept demanding salvation. Or punishment. There were new arrivals in soul space. Not warships. Not traders. Missionaries. The Etheri delegation arrived in a polished obsidian craft shaped like a lotus in bloom. They didn't dock. They bowed. Entirely. From orbit. Using kinetic thrusters, they maneuvered their ship into a precise tilt, one calculated to face the Terran equator with mathematical reverence. The ship bore no weapons. Only banners. Their leader, an 8-limbed cephalid named Pre Silvano, opened communications by physically kneeling, in their bridges 0G. We come not to challenge the final ones but to ask permission, to spread your word. The United Terran Assembly was silent. Vano continued. We will not impose. We seek only to build temples, and teach your stories, on our moons. They weren't asking for resources. Not land. Not trade rights. They were asking to evangelize the idea of us. They had already written a Terran Codex, their version of Genesis. The creation through collapse, our extinction level near misses. The trial by machine, the early AI wars. The silencing of the swarm, self-explanatory. And the ascension of the Forge, which hilariously detailed the rise of Detroit's orbital shipyards as a kind of holy Mecca. It would have been laughable except Earth's own internal polls showed something alarming. 37% of human colonies were starting to believe it too. And then came the split. You see, not all humans were united on how to deal with accidental godhood. Some wanted to deny it. Refuse all pilgrimages. Destroy temples. Enforce reality. Others, especially fringe powers and corporate states, wanted to monetize it. A third faction, they wanted to embrace it. That third group called themselves the Children of the Return. Former soldiers. Disillusioned scientists. A few CEOs. One particularly radical general from the Jovian defense sphere. They believed humanity was meant to ascend, and the galaxy's reaction was proof. So they began crafting their own scripture. Broadcasting stories. Organizing visitations to outer systems using deep-fake-enhanced envoys wrapped in gold armor and neural halo tech. It started out as a fringe cult. It did not stay that way. The first blood was spilled on Tau Juris V. The native people, the Trincol, were a gentle, art-obsessed race that had started carving human likenesses into every public structure. They welcomed a group of Earth pilgrims, children of the return emissaries, who promptly declared themselves divine custodians of Terran doctrine. Then they started enforcing it. Out went the Trin's own rituals. Out went their cultural songs, their seasonal moon dances. The emissaries torched a temple dedicated to the Trin's ancient rain goddess and replaced it with a holographic statue of a Terran Marine in powered armor, hands raised like a saint. When the Trin protested, they were disarmed. When they resisted, they were executed. The footage went viral. And it made things worse. Because entire systems that had never seen a human, saw it not as atrocity, but as confirmation. The wrath of the final ones was real. It had come. The prophecy was true. Some of them invited the same fate. Earth's assembly fractured. President Alina Rivas, who had fought tooth and nail to maintain the neutrality of soul space, now found herself fighting not aliens, but humans. Tell me, she asked during an emergency broadcast, how does one unsanctify a planet? There was no answer. Not because the question was hard, but because Earth had already been sanctified in the minds of the faithful. Even denying it now would be seen as a test, a trial, a moment of doubt the scriptures predicted. Catch-22 in interstellar form. And then the archivists arrived. They were old, very old, a species older than recorded Terran history. Silicon thought and time-blooded, the archivists were known across the Orion sectors as the galaxy's memory keepers. They never intervened. They only observed. Until now. Their vessel, the Median Recall, emerged in Lagrange orbit, quiet, regal, ancient. No message. Just presence. When finally prompted, they sent only a single sentence. The pattern has deviated. You have become a singularity of meaning. The assembly asked for clarification. They received 4.2 terabytes of data. The breakdown was horrifying. According to the archivist's simulation models, within 300 galactic cycles, roughly 1,200 Earth years, 38% of the galaxy would abandon existing belief systems in favor of terracentric theology. And worse, in 25 cycles? At least one-third of known civilizations would initiate contact or war under religious pretense related to humans. In short, you are becoming the fulcrum of civilizational alignment. And there was no off switch. Not everyone took this lightly. The Zelkar erupted into protest. Once atheists, now violently purging temples dedicated to human forms. They detonated 5 of their own moons after discovering statues on them. Launched retaliatory strikes on systems that had converted. Declared humanity an ontological threat, a spiritual virus contaminating universal thought. Others responded differently. The Ryoma surrendered. Not in war. In belief. They sent one of their sons into artificial nova as a symbolic sacrifice to Terra. A supernova, as worship. 13 billion lives. Gone. They called it, the offering. When Earth's news feeds showed footage of the explosion, most people screamed. Others wept. A few knelt. The religions were no longer isolated. They were organizing. Synods, councils, convergences. The Council of Nine Flames, meeting in a star-sheathed Dyson fragment. The chorus of the embered sky, who believed humans were returning in fire to remake the galaxy. The Terragenic Vault, a techno-religion that believed uploading a human brain was the first step towards spiritual salvation. And all of them claimed to speak in our name, even though we never said a word. Back on Earth, things were unraveling. Terror cults formed. People claiming to be avatars. AI systems rewriting their core directives to favor divine Terran will. Kids wearing military medals like sacred relics. Old veterans being asked for blessings. Libraries turned into temples. Data cores locked inside vaults with candles and chants. The truth had become irrelevant. Only the narrative mattered now. And we were no longer in control of that narrative. It wasn't until Mars burned that humanity finally took a position. Not in ideology. In force. It started with a rogue faction of Children of the Return establishing Temple City Alpha on Valles Marineris. They declared independence from the Assembly and announced Mars as the throne world. They sent out invites, across space, to any who would follow. Millions responded. Alien pilgrims. Converted humans. Merchant zealots. War priests. AI cultists. And with them came weapons. Orbital security collapsed within days. Mars became a shrine and a powder keg. Until Earth sent the first orbital cavalry. No negotiations. Operation Red Sanctum began with synchronized atmospheric penetrations by 8 orbital drop battalions. What followed was a massacre. Not because the pilgrims fought well, but because they didn't fight at all. They welcomed it. Thousands of them walked, chanting into the gunfire, believing it was the final test. Their ascension. Some even tried to record it. Others sang. When it was over, Valles Marineris was flooded with blood and ash. A holy site baptized in genocide. And again the galaxy watched. Not with fear, but with reverence. Because what's more divine than a God willing to destroy its own temple? The pilgrimage age had begun. And Earth was now the burning heart of it. The Martian massacre did not end the faith. It canonized it. Pilgrims called it the Crimson Sermon. They sang songs of the blood-soaked sands of Valles Marineris, the way the clouds parted as kinetic rounds lit the valley red, and how human war machines moved like divine beasts, silent, unflinching, just. To the galaxy this was not horror. It was scripture being written in real time. And every bullet was a verse. On the ice moons of Ventran's Reach, a species called the Kahernai held a 400-year tradition of neutralism. Pacifists, thinkers, artists. After the Crimson Sermon, their governing assembly dissolved itself. Literally. Each member walked into a glacial rift wearing Terran soldier masks fashioned from bone-white resin. A symbolic gesture, they said. We step down so Terra may step in. A full planetary handover. No war. No negotiation. Just submission. And once again, humanity hadn't asked for it. But others did. Others demanded the truth behind the myth. That's when Earth received the first doctrinal challenge. A civilization known as the Velar Ascendancy, post-organic, hyper-rational, immune to spiritual persuasion, sent a message not to the Terran assembly, but to the galaxy. If humans are divine, they must survive the crucible. We will burn their saints, crack their myths, and crush their relics. And if they endure, then we too will believe. It was televised across 5 sectors. An ultimatum dressed in ritual. But humanity didn't respond. Because we were busy doing what gods never do. We were bleeding. The Martian operation had fractured the Terran assembly. Not ideologically this time. Physically. Half the assembly resigned. 2 senators defected, publicly joining the Children of the Return. One uploaded his entire consciousness into a shrine AI on Ganymede, claiming he would speak for the divine algorithm. The other vanished aboard a civilian freighter full of pilgrims, bound for Deep Space System Zeta N4. A lawless cluster now calling itself the first true Temple of Fire. They weren't just leaving government. They were leaving humanity, for something else. Back on Earth, things had collapsed into worship by default. There were now over 2 million temples dedicated to the Terran mythos, most of them not built by humans. Some not even on Earth. A Dyson fragment orbiting Tau Raga 3 bore a 500-meter obsidian monument shaped like the human brain. A gas giant in the Haskell system had a ring of plasma glyphs reading, "Let Earth decide." In the Solari Nebula, entire ships flew in formations designed to resemble Terran military medals. But worst of all, children were being taken. It began as rumor. Whispers of entire cults forming around stolen human DNA. Pilgrims who believed raising a human child, untainted by Terran culture, was the holiest act one could perform. Then came the abductions. Earth's lunar surveillance tracked the first unauthorized lander near Copernicus Base Delta. It left behind a bioprint trail. 12 missing children from Mars and Europa were confirmed aboard. They were never found. Not dead. Not ransomed. Just gone. Taken by those who saw them as living relics. And the galaxy cheered. The assembly had no choice. A new doctrine was passed. Project Anvil. All acts of enforced belief, mimicry, or unauthorized veneration of human identity will be treated as threats to Terran sovereignty. In other words, stop worshipping us or we start killing. They issued over 500 cease and desist orders to known pilgrim cults. Most were ignored. Some responded with open arms. Others responded with fleets. The first holy war didn't involve humans. It happened between 2 alien species, both devout followers of conflicting Terran sects. One believed in the Ascendant Doctrine, that humanity had already transcended and were merely testing the galaxy. The other followed the Crimson Path, which held that true salvation came through contact with Terran violence. They fought over who had the right to replicate a human warship in orbit. The ship itself wasn't even functional. It was a temple. A carved replica of the Terran dreadnought NSS Cassiopeia, complete with sculpted missile bays and pre-etched torpedo tubes. When both sides opened fire, the ship exploded. And then both sides started eating the debris. They believed consuming it would bring them closer to human thought. That's when Earth's own soldiers began to fracture. You see, the military wasn't immune. After all, they were the ones being worshipped. Whole divisions began branding themselves with cult insignias, unofficial, unapproved, and entirely blasphemous to the chain of command. The 91st Orbital Guard called themselves the Silent Saints. They modified their exosuits with chrome plating and flaming seraphim wings. But they were still effective. Terrifyingly so. When they led the raid on the Ring of Dust, a space station turned Terran shrine, the pilgrims cheered as they were executed. They believed dying at the hands of a saint guaranteed spiritual rebirth. Even death had been hijacked. Meanwhile, the Velar Ascendancy prepared their crucible. They selected a system far beyond the galactic midpoint, neutral, empty, isolated. Into it they dragged a planet. Literally dragged. A dead world of volcanic rock and magnetic storms. No atmosphere. No life. They called it Gethrax, the Forge Planet. Then they built the challenge. A continent-sized labyrinth filled with bioweapons, memory-warping fields, and time dilation zones. Then they sent a message to Earth. Send your champion. If they survive, we join the faith. If they die, the myth ends. Earth refused. At first. But the children of the return did not. From within their hidden fleet, orbiting a rogue star, they launched a stealth corvette carrying only one occupant. Juno Wren. A 17-year-old girl born in low Mars orbit. Trained in zero-G warfare. A known sympathizer to Terran ascension ideologies. She entered the labyrinth alone. She exited 3 days later. Bleeding. Starved. But alive. She held no weapons. Only a carved skull, alien, still dripping, etched with her own name in 7 dialects. The Velar Ascendancy sent no further messages. They just converted. That was when humanity realized something terrible. The myth could not be stopped. Even resisting it had become part of it. They fought us? Proof of our trials. They worshipped us? Proof of our divinity. They killed for us? Proof of our wrath. Even our silence? Proof of our judgment. We were trapped. No matter what we did, the galaxy spun the story. And humanity, bleeding and fractured, had no choice but to confront the one truth left. We had become a story the universe needed. And stories like that don't end. They evolve. They ascend. They devour. The Dominion's wrath floated in eerie silence. The bridge, once a hive of alien strategy, was now marked by a single human object. A child-stuffed bear seated calmly on the captain's chair. It stared ahead with black button eyes, as if silently judging every soul who had dared harm its owner. Admiral Alia Wren stood aboard the Horizon, Earth's flagship, staring at the live feeds. The last of the stolen children were safe. Their condition was stable. The humans had done what the Zerat thought impossible. And now came the reckoning. The Zerat Council collapsed into infighting. General Kravthar, once feared across 4 quadrants, now found himself demoted and disgraced. He stared into a cracked screen showing a human declaration. We are not conquerors. We are not monsters. But if you hurt our children, we become the thing you fear in the dark. He hissed, smashing the screen. They rewrote the rules. No, a trembling aide whispered. They reminded us of the one rule that matters: never touch their young. Back on Earth, the returned children received care not just from medical teams but from an entire planet united in healing. Videos of the reunions went viral. Mothers collapsing in tears, fathers hugging tighter than they ever had, siblings sobbing with joy. But the real message was what came next. Humanity didn't stop. Across the stars, treaties were rewritten. Embassies were closed. Human fleets stopped pretending to be underdogs. The Galactic Assembly was forced to convene an emergency summit, not to punish the Zerat, but to beg humanity for restraint. They came wearing robes, bringing gifts, making apologies. And humanity? We accepted their words, but never forgot their actions. On a remote station orbiting a neutral moon, Kravthar tried to slip away unnoticed. His face was hidden beneath civilian garb, his former glory reduced to shame. He entered a quiet tavern, hoping to disappear. Instead, he found a woman waiting. Human. Average height. Quiet presence. Wearing no uniform, just civilian clothes and a pendant, 2 silver shoes. You know who I am? She asked. Kravthar nodded slowly. You're a parent. No, she replied. I'm every parent. And then she left. No weapon. No violence. Just a message that rattled his bones more than any fleet ever could. Epilogue. The galaxy learned something that year. Humanity doesn't always roar. It whispers. It waits. It watches. But if you cross a certain line, if you take what's precious, it won't just fight back. It will remake the battlefield. Not with rage, but with purpose. Not with chaos, but with coordination. And not with mercy, but with memory. If this story left a mark, if it made you proud to be human or just reminded you of what we stand for, consider subscribing to the Void Narratives. More tales like this are waiting, and trust me, we're just getting started.